Titled Cobro, this episode of Only Murders in the Building was very much focused on Mabel working on her own in order to find out what happened to Ben Glenroy on the night that he died twice, with Charles very much on his own following what happened at the end of the previous episode, and Oliver coming to terms with the fact that the replacement of Charles wasn't as smooth as what he wanted. It was an episode that was rather isolated in its delivery of the story. So with that, let's recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from this episode. Here is Only Murders in the Building, Season 3, Episode 7, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Is Dickie the killer? Well, this episode very much pointed towards Ben's brother being the killer on that fateful night, something which I must say I have been predicting from early on, but now the fact that it's been mentioned, it might not actually be the case. However, the motive was something that was definitely there. We saw that Dickie was adopted by Ben's parents when they believed that they couldn't have children, but they eventually went on to give birth to Ben, something which it seemed as though meant that Ben was treated slightly better due to the fact that he was biologically related to them. This is something that would have most likely ground Dickie down over time. As well as that, we saw that Dickie was essentially the man that was operating the machine, which was Ben, and he kept him out of trouble over the years and ensured that his public image was squeaky clean. However, he never got the recognition from his brother or those around him for the good work that he did, something which weighed on his mind. But the most important moment that could point towards Dickie being the killer is the fact that he was an individual that was often behind some of Ben's best work, like the creation of Cobros. On the very first creation of the comic book cover when they were both younger, it was signed with R. Glenroy, not a B, which everybody presumed it was, assuming that it was Ben, but R for Richard, which is the full name often given to somebody with the nickname Dick or Dickie. So Dickie could well have gotten to the point where he was tired of living in his brother's shadow and was just sick of not getting recognized for being behind some of Ben's best work. And maybe he just couldn't take being second best like he had been for his entire life. This could also be a reason as to why he was so certain of the fact that Gregory did it, and why he wanted to ensure that he was kept behind bars. Because with Gregory as the main suspect and being accused, it would steer all attention away from Dickie and mean that the authorities wouldn't go snooping around again. Plus, I also think it makes sense as to why that book was found tucked away at Loretta's house. Loretta and Dickie had been working together, and he was now managing her. So they would have most definitely spent some time alone together, which is where Dickie could have left the book to make it seem like she was obsessed with him. With us also finding out that he was the individual who bought Ben's hanky off of Uma at the end of the episode, buying it for $7,000. Could it tie into the line at the start of the episode which Uma said, "Things keep people alive when they're gone," and he's done it to remember his brother? Or is he securing it so he can pin the blame on somebody else, just like what he could have done with Loretta and the book? Only time will tell, but I think it's very much looking like it could be Dickie who's behind what happened to his brother. There was also a moment where he was talking about minimum bids on certain items after saying how everybody wanted to make a quick buck off of his brother, so he was definitely a hypocrite in that sense. It also seems as though the detective is going to be reopening the case following what he heard on the podcast, so Dickie might have the authorities coming his way, especially with Mabel thinking that he did it. Mabel had a particularly interesting story in this episode. She was the main reason as to why we found out everything about Dickie and the revelations that followed. It was clear to see that she missed Charles and Oliver as she was looking to do the new podcast on her own, but it wasn't something that stopped her from doing it. Right at the end of the episode, we saw that she'd moved out of the apartment without telling either of them, as there was now a mother that was living in it. And with that, we saw that Mabel had released a new episode of the Only Murders in the Building podcast, where she mentioned that she'd be doing it on her own moving forward. However, I don't think that will be the case. There was a moment where she looked at her phone and you could tell that she was missing them, as she was staring at the photo of all three of them together, so I think they will get back together in order to solve the case. With her finding out about Ben moving his watch 20 minutes into the past so that he'd always arrive fashionably late, it meant that he actually died 20 minutes later than what the authorities thought that he did. So it meant that Gregory wouldn't have been the main suspect, as he wouldn't have been in the vicinity. So he did get some super sleuthing from Mabel in this episode, and she may actually be able to get him out. Tobbert had a small inclusion in this episode, and I'm actually starting to lean away from him being a main suspect, to be honest. I'm just not getting that impression from him anymore due to the way that he's been consistently acting. Charles Charles's arc in this episode felt a little bit pointless, almost like what it has done in the past few episodes. We saw that he was now suffering with being on his own, following on from losing Joy, quitting the musical and burning his bridges with Oliver, and also cutting ties with Mabel. So the very thing that he was fearful of was something that became a reality, and he was now struggling. He didn't like the idea of being replaced in the musical, and he also didn't like the fact that he had nobody around him. However, in the end, we saw that all of his lurking around coincided with Oliver getting frustrated with Matthew Broderick, and the pair ended up reconciling and were on good terms again. However, with them going to give Mabel Loretta's journal as a peace offering, and believing that it couldn't have been Loretta who killed Ben, it's now going to be interesting to see how the dynamic is going to be in the next episode, especially with the podcast that they were once a part of now being released. Oliver didn't have the largest direct involvement in this episode of the show. He was pretty much just working on his play and provided the comic relief for the runtime. This was due to the frustration that he had with Matthew Broderick and the overcommitment that he had to the musical and the role that he'd been cast as. His doubts about Loretta were still lying within his mind, and we found out that they hadn't actually spoken since the evening that they went on their date. So he's filled with regrets, especially after Charles said that it was ridiculous for him to think that Loretta did it. So I'm guessing we'll see them pick up in the next episode, especially seeing as though the opening night of his musical is drawing ever closer. Overall review. I thought this was an okay episode of the show. It was a bit better than last week's episode, but it still didn't have the excitement that I feel we usually get with this show. Maybe it's just suffering from the hump that some shows tend to experience when it gets to the middle of a season, which is something that is a shame because I didn't expect it to suffer with that. I'm hoping as the season develops it will start to amp up the pace and build towards a dramatic finale and revelation. In terms of Matthew Broderick, I thought he was great in this role for the show. Whilst only a short cameo, it was definitely funny, and he made the role feel extremely believable. I like the murder element of the show, the main thing that it's about, but I'm finding the disruption in the trio's relationship to feel a bit tiresome now. The show is at its best when they're all on screen together trying to solve the murder, and I feel like that's been lacking a bit in this middle part of the season. I would have liked to have seen Loretta in this episode too. We've not seen her for 2 episodes now, and for most of the other cast members we've not seen them in several. So it does make it difficult to try and work out who are the most likely suspects. I think we will see the show get better over the coming weeks. At least, I hope we do. So, there you have it. Only Murders in the Building Season 3 Episode 7, Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos such as Endings Explained, Theories and Predictions, and Character Breakdowns, then click on the I button. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @BrainPilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of this episode? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.